Hello guys, and welcome to a new Steel Division 2 video today by me, Vulcan. Today I have for you the Battlegroup preview for the 184th Rifles. This is a Soviet division which has an offensive rating of C, which means that it is more inclined to defense. However, it does have some tricks up its sleeve, and you can see that in the anti-tank tab here with the ISU 122s that we'll get to later on. Otherwise, it's a pretty standard infantry division that uses infantry support tanks and plenty of artillery and air support. I currently have the 184th set up for the balanced deployment type with the intention of putting on a little bit of pressure in phase A, after which I will then bring in the big guns in phase B and C, and I'll need the balanced deployment type in order to be able to afford those, so that's very important. Let's start with the Recon tab, and you can see that first of all I have our good old friends, the Dozor squads in phase A. These are your two-man Recon squads, and they come with the BA-20 in my battle group, and this provides me with an armoured car that can harass infantry that doesn't have AT. Really good for that. Same goes for the M3A1 Razvedka with its 50 cal, but the Razvedka does cost that 10 points more, which I don't think is quite worth it. Then there is the card of Valentines that I have in my battle group, the Valentine 3. This is okay for killing light to medium armoured targets at close range, because it does have 75mm of penetration after all, with the 40% accuracy and 15 round per minute rate of fire, which is really decent. The downside to the Valentine is always going to be its speed, however. Then I have a card of the snipers in phase B. These work in replacement to things like infantry guns in that they provide tons of suppression at a decent range of 1000 meters. So keep them out of range of enemy machine gun fire, and then these can do a lot of work for sure against enemy infantry. And that's what I'd use them for. Then other choices in the Recon tab include the motorcycle with the DP. This is not that great because it can be killed by light arms fire just a little bit too easily. Then there is the Razvedka, which is your standard 4-man Recon squad. Make sure to bring them in a faster transport than the ZIS-42 though. Then we have a card of the BA-10M. These would be actually really good if they had HE on their main gun, but they do not. So these are a vehicle that you could potentially flank with, but their off-road speed is limited, to say the least. Then finally, the last choice in the Recon tab includes the Konaya Razvedka, and these are a 11-man Recon squad, which if you need survivable recon in certain situations, I guess they'd be a relatively good choice. But for the most part, you want your recon to be hidden, and therefore these guys aren't the best for that. They do still have very good stealth, but it's not quite the exceptional stealth that two-man squads have, so bear that in mind. Now moving on to the infantry tab, we are starting with a card of the Saperi with the submachine guns. These are a 4-man squad with HE grenades and Panzerfaust, really good for rushing to the front line and basically taking positions that your opponents won't necessarily expect, since they can be brought in the Jeep that has 105 km/h speed. And that's what makes the 4-man squads preferable in this case. I'd probably bring in most of these at the very start in the initial deployment. Then I have a card of the Strelkovaya DP. These are decent for medium and long range engagements against infantry. They do suffer at close range engagements though, because they don't have any submachine guns. PTRD is also really useful for taking on light armoured vehicles and provides that extra little bit of threat that may prevent those lighter vehicles from pushing forwards onto your positions. So where I have, for example, the BA-10 in the Recon tab, which has armour, this can deal with those pesky light armoured vehicles, whereas if this didn't have any AT, it could just be run up next to by an armoured vehicle and just wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So that's the importance of having a little bit of AT, especially in the early game. Then I have a card of the Strelkovaya Diviziya. These are 3-man command squads. Ideally, I'd want them to have all submachine guns, but they do have smoke grenades, so that's what makes them preferable, as well as the fact that you can get 4 in Phase A. Then I have a card of 6 Tanko Desaniki coming in with 1-star veterancy, and they are using up my availability of M2A1 half-tracks, which have the 50 cal on them. And these can be really hard to deal with in the early game, not only because they're fantastic in close quarters with those submachine guns, but also this half-track is just an absolute nightmare for sure. Then moving into Phase B, I have a card of the Sapari. These are good for close range engagement since they have the HE grenade, but can deal with units at long range due to having a machine gun and 7 SVTs. Then I have another card of the Strelki in Phase B to provide me with more line infantry. And in Phase C we have a card of the Avtomachiki coming in with the Studbecker, which has 10 submachine guns, ultimate close range infantry squad, and then the AT grenade, which is really shit because of its range, or lack of. Finally, a card of the Strelki DP. We get 27 of them with no veterancy in Phase C, so really good for just filling out the lines. And that's really what the Strelki are there for, whilst providing that light AT threat, which can also kill transports. So if an infantry squad's coming towards your infantry squad, you might be able to just kill it with the PTRD before it unloads, which is really nice sometimes. So PTRDs can be useful in that case. Now, you may have noticed that most of the infantry here we have kind of seen before, but the infantry tab of the 184th Rifles is very important for the success of the division, I believe. So make sure that you find yourself the perfect setup. Other choices in the infantry tab include the NKVD, 4-man infantry squad. I feel like they should give some sort of encouragement to nearby units or something, or maybe just like some dread to nearby units, so that if your units, I don't know, get pinned down, they can't retreat or something because these guys are nearby and they would shoot them in the back. That would be like some sort of cool thing to make them relevant. I don't know. Either way, there is the choice of the standard Strelki squad. These guys have the Mosin Nagants, so they're not as good as the Strelki with the DP, which have the SVTs instead. So very lackluster, and I don't really find there's space for them in this division or battle group because you get enough cards of the upgraded Strelki. Then there's the motorcycle command, which is pretty shit. Then the Avtokomroti, which are your 3-man submachine gun command squad with the smokes, but due to their limited availability in Phase A, I've gone off using them. Then after that, it's just more command squads. Tanko Komroti with an AT grenade rather than the smoke grenades, and then the Sapari Komroti, which have a Panzerfaust to accompany them. Next up we have the tank tab, and this leaves a lot to be desired, that's for sure. The first card that I have in Phase A is the M5L. These are Lendlease M5 Stuarts, and currently they have 90mm of penetration. I believe this is going to be nerfed, but either way, really good tanks for supporting infantry early on against light armoured vehicles, that's for sure. So worth having them early on. Then I have a card of the Valentine Komroti. You're kind of forced to bring these in Phase A. You can choose to have 2-star veterancy, but you lose 2 availability, and that's not something you can really afford due to the severe lack of tanks overall that you get in the division. So in my battle group, definitely 1-star, and these are okay because they have the 15 round per minute rate of fire, so at close range engagements can take on light to medium targets quite well. You will kill something like a Panzer IV with these. Then there is a card of the M3S Komroti, which are Lendlease M3 Lees. Again, you can upgrade these to 2-star veterancy, but only available in Phase A. I'm going to be bringing them in with 1-star veterancy for the extra availability. And these can be quite nice because they have a nice amount of AP firepower with both the turret on the top and the main turret in the hull that can fire at the same time at an enemy armored target. And they also have the 30 cal and HE shells for dealing with infantry, so decent infantry support, good against armor at close range. Then I have a card of the Valentine 9 in Phase B. These are purely there for anti-tank purposes. They don't have any HE or machine guns or anything, so you can only fire at tanks or armored targets with these. But they are relatively good for their cost, in a sense that 115mm of penetration will pop most tanks until up until things like Tigers and Panthers. So they're not too bad, but I wish there was a better choice in the division, that's for sure. Maybe at least one card of T-34s would have been nice. Moving on to the support tab of the 184th, and we're starting with a card of the Ognemechiki, the two-man flamethrower squads. I think it's important to gain all the advantages you can when it comes to infantry. So having these supplement your infantry squads, not only with the flamethrower but with the smoke grenades as well, is really good. And they accompany the Sapori squads well in the early game, like straight off the bat if you use them in the deployment phase. That's what I like to use them for. Then I have the Commander, the Combat in Phase A. Pretty standard stuff, gives the bonuses to other leader units. Then I have a card of Supply, Phase B Supply. And I also have a card of Phase C Supply while we're at it. And that's mainly for my artillery and heavy use of artillery in this battle group specifically. Then I have the M2 Combat in Phase B for, again, another Commander. Other choices in the support tab include the 50mm mortar, which I have seen used more and more. It has decent suppression against infantry for sure. Then there is the Maxim machine gun, limited in its use because of its lack of range compared to its counterparts, but still good, I guess, for helping pin infantry at range. Then there's the infantry gun. Again, it lacks for its role. I mentioned how snipers kind of make up for the use of these, and so that's what I use instead for the most part. It's just the snipers instead of the assault guns. And that's it for the support tab. It's very lackluster, that's for sure. Next up we have the anti-tank tab, and this is where things start to get a little bit more exciting with the 184th, because we actually have a unit that we haven't seen before. But before we get to that, let's talk about what I have in Phase A, and that is 2 cards of 6 45mm AT guns. They come in at 1-star veterancy, which is nice because with a commander nearby you can make them 3-star veterancy, and with their rate of fire that will get increased and they can be really strong. But you're going to want to make sure you use them on return fire and efficient shot for the most part, because they have a limited amount of APCR shells that have the 100mm of penetration, and then their standard AP shells only have 75mm of penetration. So yeah, make sure that you use efficient shot for sure, and then you'll get some decent value for money out of these AT guns, which only cost 35 points apiece. I've got another card of these in Phase B with 9 on the card. But then also in Phase B, I have the ISU 122. And this thing is an absolute beast. I can get 2 of them in Phase B with no veterancy. And I have been tempted to upvet them, but the fact that you don't get many of them at all really takes me away from that. But 110mm of frontal armor is enough to make them survivable. The main attraction to these is the 200mm of penetration on their standard AP shell with 9 damage. I think that means with a crit they might be able to like one-shot Tigers, which is pretty damn awesome. So brilliant anti-tank gun. If you can get them into an ambushing position on like return fire, you can just pop those heavy tanks, and that is what I would use them for. Just bear in mind that in a long range engagement over time, their rate of fire may mean that they lose out quite significantly. They've only got 4 rounds per minute rate of fire. I've got another card of these in Phase C, so that I have an extra 4 of them for the later game. And that's pretty much your lot for my choices. Other choices in the anti-tank tab include the PTRS-41, which I would definitely recommend you stay away from because it's a lot of money for a 2-man squad that isn't that effective. And then there is a card of the ZIS-3 that you could definitely replace the 45mm in Phase B with, in my opinion, because the standard AP shells is 35mm more in penetration than the AP shells of the 45mm. And you do, of course, get 8 APCR shells with 135mm of penetration. You're still going to want to use these on efficient shot and return fire, though, because things like Tigers won't be penetrated in the frontal armor by a ZIS-3. Moving on to the anti-air, things are pretty standard. I've got a card of the 37mm in Phase A and a card of the 37mm in Phase B. Unfortunately, there's a limited amount of Dushkas available, so I'm using the Dushka trucks with the Phase A card so that I have extra AA in the early game, and then I can supplement with a little bit more in Phase B should I need it. And 10 37mm AA should be enough to get you through the game, especially considering this battle group does have quite a lot of fighters and stuff to supplement. Other choices in the anti-air tab include the Dushka trucks on their own, of course, the Maxim 4Ms, which have a little bit more firepower than the Dushkas, but you do of course pay that extra 10-point cost. And then the other choice is the 85mm. Now this is very much like an 88 in the way that it works. It has the AP shells against ground targets with 145mm of penetration, which is pretty decent, as well as the HE shells to use against enemy infantry and so on. And then its anti-air capability is pretty good, especially if it hits the mark. But ideally, I wouldn't recommend using them as AT guns, because if they come under fire from tanks, they can get pinned very quickly because they are an AA piece. So yeah, bear that in mind. Also, they can only be brought in with this massive tractor, which isn't the fastest vehicle in the world. Now we're getting somewhere as we move on to the artillery tab of the 184th. To start, I have a card of the 82mm mortars to provide me with some HE fire support, as well as the smoke. The smoke's pretty important for the offensive pushes in Phase A. Then I have a card of the artillerists. These are to provide radios to the front line so that I can provide corrected shot from my artillery, although I'm still working out which units have radios and which do not. Then I have a card of the 122mm artillery. These guys have 6 damage on their HE shells, which is okay. It's mediocre, but they're long range artillery and they don't cost all that much, so pretty nice. And then they do have some heat shells. If anything gets too close to these, they will get popped, that's for sure. Then I also have a card of the 152mm, which is the full 7 damage on the HE shells, plus the massive suppression and blast. So really, really good. And I think these do have radios to accompany the artillerists, but I'm not entirely sure. Then I have another card of these in Phase C, so just giving me the maximum firepower that I can potentially use corrected shot in-game to smash the enemy wherever I need to, and this will help me suppress things like heavy tanks that I would otherwise have a hard time dealing with. Now, other choices in the artillery tab include the VZ VOD UPR, which are your artillery command squads. If you have extra availability or extra activation points, sorry, it may be a good idea to get some more command. It's always a nice way to do so in the artillery tab should you need to. Then there's the 120mm mortars if you'd like a bit more firepower in the early game. Then there's the 76.2mm artillery. It's not too great. The HE shells only do 3 damage, so limited in effectiveness for sure, but do have the unlimited range and smoke support, so that may be a reason to take them. Finally, there's the WC-52 with the 280mm off map. This is probably one of the biggest off maps I've seen so far. It's pretty damn awesome, and I would definitely recommend giving it a go. It's just, in my case, I've been focusing on using artillery like the 152mm at the moment, but this could definitely find a place in my battle group. I could potentially replace the 122mm with these guys. They are expensive though, 190 points, so don't lose them before you've used all of your salvos, that's for sure. And finally we have the air tab, and this will explain the reason for my lack of choices in the anti-air, and it mainly comes down to these LA5FNs. I've got a card in phase A and phase B without any veterancy, which gives us 6 in total over the game. And these are good for shooting down enemy fighters and enemy fighter bombers. They do struggle a little bit against anything that has decent resilience, because they won't do enough damage and then overshoot because they're very fast. But if you bring them in pairs, then you will always be able to shoot down the target. My other choice in phase A is the IL-2M3. This is a napalm bomber. So it has the same potential as the Mosquito Pathfinder did in Steel Division Anomaly 44, in that you can napalm bomb your opponent's reinforcement roads to basically slow them down quite significantly. And you can do it at the start of the game, or you can do it, midway through the game on a specific point. Just make sure you got them covered with your LA5FN, because people are going to want to shoot down IL-2s all day long. They seem to be a massive target most of the time. Then in phase B, accompanying my other LA5FNs, I have the IL-4. Now this IL-4 is equipped with anti-tank rockets, which are 305mm. It's crazy. They have 8 damage, and they can be effective at taking out heavy armored targets. That's for sure. They're absolutely crazy big. I haven't had much of a chance to try them out myself, but I've heard from other players that they are pretty decent. Then in phase C, I have the IL-4 equipped with a 1,000 kilogram bomb and 2 500 kilogram bombs, so quite the payload here. These bombers can certainly do a lot of damage, especially if you bring them in both at the same time. Just drop them on like a group of tigers or panthers or something. You can just blow them all to smithereens. It's ridiculous. So yeah, definitely worth having to help you deal with the heavier targets. Other choices in the air tab include the IL-2KR, which honestly I've been considering putting into my battle group somehow, in order to supplement the napalm bomber in phase A. They provide recon, and they're pretty decent at taking down things like Ju-87s as well. Then there's the IL-2M3 available with 8 HE rockets. Good for pinning like light units like infantry and potentially AT guns, but other than that, not really fantastic. Then you have the IL-2M3 with the AT rockets. There's only 4 of them, and they don't do much damage, so very lackluster again. Then there is the IL-4, which comes with 10 100 kilogram bombs, so a bit more of a carpet bomber variant. The last choice is the LA5FN, which has 2 50 kilogram bombs, but does suffer for speed and agility because of it, so not necessarily recommended. So the defense tab in the 184th Rifle is actually probably worth mentioning. Because this is a tier C division, it makes it a defensive division, therefore it gains bonuses in breakthrough. And you can see we have 8 card slots here. It's pretty simple though. I filled them with 1 card of the barbed wire, 1 card of the trenches, 2 cards of the bunker maxims with 1-star veterancy, giving you 8 in total. The bunker AT 45mm got both cards of those with no veterancy, so you get 4 of them. And then you have 2 cards of the 76mm AT bunkers. So bring all of the AT bunkers every time, I would recommend, for defenses, and then fill the rest of the slots with whatever you need. But I like the bunker maxims for sure, and I think it's important to have at least 1 card of barbed wire and trenches. So that's how I tend to fill things out. So to wrap things up, the 184th Rifles is quite an interesting division. It focuses quite heavily on having a decent infantry tab, which is then supported by close range tank support. Then, in order to push back your enemy or deal with enemy tanks, you have to rely on your anti-tank tab with the ISU 122s or your artillery and air. And in this case, I've gone for a bit of everything. We've got decent anti-tank, we've got decent artillery, and we've got decent air. And combined can be very, very strong. So if you make use of all of them, I think you'll have success. And I built this up as a balanced deployment type, so that we can gain access to those heavier units in Phase B and Phase C and have the points to actually purchase them. And that's it. So let me know what you think of my battle group, whether there's anything you'd change or make different. I do like to hear your suggestions and choices. Of course, this isn't my finalized battle group by any means. I will continue to improve it all the way to when I finally do a battle group overview as opposed to a battle group preview. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.